Hello YouTube, and especially all you knife people out there. I've had a lot of requests for a knife sharpening video, more specifically with regard to how I might remove a factory V-edge and add a convex. So I picked up a somewhat inexpensive knife. This is a Gerber Moment. I think they make one bigger than this that has a actual finger groove. Right here, a finger groove choil or something. But anyway, I picked this up because it's not too expensive, and I thought that it would be a good demonstration video. This knife steel is actually 5 CR15 MOV, which from what I can find out is supposedly a relatively hard, I think it's a Rockwell 55 to 57, depending, high carbon stainless steel. I've never used it before. This is the first time doing it, and again, I picked up this knife specifically to try to get the V-edge out. I wasn't aware, I ordered this online, I wasn't aware at the time that this is a hollow ground blade. So instead of having a saber type of grind, it actually hollows in to a very fine point. And I believe this is predominantly designed for hunting, skinning, that sort of thing. So a very fine blade may be advantageous in that particular situation, but I'm going to try and remove this V-edge now and add probably going to be a very shallow convex, given that this is a hollow ground blade. So I'll do that in just a second, and I'm going to go through my setup here. I'll put the link below, but this is a sink spacer basically for sharpening stones, and I think it's a Tojiro Pro. It's right here if this will focus, and I got it from, I believe it was Chef's Knives to Go. Really good site for getting stones and sharpening accessories. In fact, my Sharpening Pro stones all came from there. So I'll put the links and stuff below. While I'm on the sink spacer here for holding sharpening stones, as you can see, this just kind of expands to straddle your sink in varying widths. I will go tell you in this right here, these rubber feet are supposed to be good for setting it like on a countertop and keeping it from sliding. In that situation, I would think that you're just as good off with one of these inexpensive stone holders with the rubber feet. There's a little bit more surface area, so it's kind of like hydroplaning a car tire. If there's a lot of water film that builds up under these do have a tendency to slide a little bit. But if you get some of those like shelf liners, the anti-skid shelf liners, and put it underneath this, it does a great job. It's a lot less expensive. They have a less expensive one of these, one that's a little bit cheaper, but based on the measurements, I wasn't sure it would fit my sink because my sink's not very large. So what I did was gonna say that these rubber feet actually kind of suck. They don't stay on here very well. And so what I did was took some waterproof Gorilla Glue and glued these in place because they kept sliding off into my sink. And that was kind of annoying. So the rubber does help with tension on the sink side. So basically all you do is slide this into place to set it up. And then the top screws up here hold the spacer in place. And then these screws down here adjust to the stone itself. And the other annoyance with this is this left side stone. Let me put a stone in place here. Just grab this Chaucer 400 and put it on here. When this has a little bit of wiggle room, you can see that right there, and when this slides into place, it fits relatively well. But what you find out is because this is clockwise and it rotates the lock plate toward the stone that way, because you're grinding forward, it does a good job. But this side over here, it actually locks counterclockwise because, you know, righty-tighty from this side, and actually pushes this part away from the stone. So if you do get one of these, it is a very great accessory. It keeps your counters from getting all kinds of dirty, but you're going to want to hold this in place with your thumb and then lock that down, and then maybe do the right side second. I find if I do that, I don't really need, it stays in place enough. I don't need like an anti-skid mat or anything, but they are available. But this is somewhat annoying. It seems to me like they could have made a separate mechanism, but it may have driven the price up. So I'm going to readjust the camera angle now and kind of prep all this stuff to go, and we'll get to the grinding. All right, guys, slightly better angle now, at least I hope it will be for you. And you can see this, this sink plate works really well. It locks in really well. No sliding of metal in the stone is going to knock this free, especially with those rubber feet glued in place. And this is really advantageous because if you're doing it on a sink counter or a countertop next to your sink, or rather, you're constantly added water via dropping it with your hands, cupping it over, dripping water, spraying it, however you would normally go about doing it. And you have a tendency to get water and metal and stone residue all over your countertops, and it can really be a pain to clean up. It can get everywhere. So this not only locks your stone in place, but allows that residue to flow over into your sink. And all you need to do if you're worried about your plumbing system is to get some sort of a stopper to prevent the water from draining. And then you can collect the residue when you're done. But a very handy tool if you do a lot of stone sharpening. I'd recommend getting some version of one of these. So I'm going to take you through all the stones that I have in my collection now, and I'm mainly doing that because I don't know what knives I'm going to need, or sorry, what stones I'm going to need on this knife. And so I figured I would show you what all stones are in my arsenal, if you will, and then kind of tell you about when I use them. So all right, so the first stone I have to show you is this Nubatama 60 grit. Now this is very, very coarse. The top is actually surprisingly smooth, but it feels a lot like a grinding stone, like a shop grinding wheel. It's excellent for removing really, really high quantities of metal quickly. I had a chef's knife that I've had for years, and it was dull. It had major nicks and stuff in it. So I use this to remove a lot of metal to try to set an edge so that I could then turn around and sharpen it. Mainly, unless there's something really bad going on with the steel, I use this as a flattening stone for some of my other stones, like the next grit up I'll show you in a minute. So not super expensive. Most people aren't going to need something like this. But if you're looking at helping grind out some serious curvature, some dishing in other stones, or you have major metal problems, maybe consider this 60 grit stone. Again, Nubatama. The next one up is a stone I'm rapidly liking a lot. This is a Nubatama Bamboo 150. And this is my go-to stone if I am wanting to really grind away some metal. So I'm probably going to start with this one on here. If it cuts too quickly, I'll jump up to the next stone I happen to have, which is the 400. I'll show you that in a minute. About the size of a brick. It's huge. You can see it here. Really nice stone. Removes metal relatively quickly. It removes it maybe slightly faster than my Shapton Pro 220, which dished out really bad over the course of things. I no longer use it. But this is also a good flattening stone for your finer grit stones, again, which I'll show you in a minute. The reviews on Chef Knife To Go said that this doesn't dish too quickly. Maybe the case. It still dishes faster than I thought a stone this size would, but a good stone nonetheless. And the only way to flatten this one that I've found is with that 60. So it's a huge stone, so it should last for quite some time now, and really good at taking away metal quickly with fewer passes. And so we'll see again how it does on the Gerber Moment in a minute. So a Nubatama 150. The next stone up will be the Chaucera 400, and these come stamped on one side here, as you can see. I flipped them over and used the back, so I don't have to fool with that, and it helps preserve what the numbers will be, so I can see them in the future. Now, I know that some resources, especially maybe in Japan, if you've watched a lot of Virtual Vice's videos, he likes these stones as well, and his come with a plastic base. The ones I ordered did not. Now, I got my Chaucera stones from Sharpening Supplies. I think it was something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but maybe sharpeningsupplies.com. But I'll put the link in the comments below and you can check it out. I got it from them because if you order multiple stones at a time, you can get discounts. And I thought they had a really good deal at the time I did it. Great customer service, just like Chef's Knives To Go, so I'll put that below. Again, this would be where I would normally start working with a knife that I used in the field, say even 3V. If it suffered some chipping or something, normally I will start on this stone. I would only resort to a lower grit if it was really giving me a lot of problems. So a really nice stone, a 400 is a great stone to have in anyone's kit. It's almost ideal place to get going, as I've mentioned. The next one up, and I've mentioned in my comments in other videos that these aren't necessarily spaced like you have to get them. Mine are in almost 200 increments or such, doubles, that sort of thing. So 400, we've got 60, 150, 400. This is an 800 stone. Again, Chaucera, beautiful stone. Up from that, I have the Chaucera 1000. Great stone as well. Up from that is the 3000. Okay, again, these are all in the same family. Then the 5000, I love this stone. So you've got the Chaucera 5000. And then after that, the Chauceras really get super expensive, and I was trying something new. So I went with the Sharpening Pros, and you can see they're a lot thinner. I'll show you a kind of comparison here. Get a different color. So you have that thickness versus this thickness versus the Nubatama. Gives you kind of an idea, if you're familiar with the size comparisons that we're talking about here. So Sharpening Pro, a great stone, a little bit different feel. I'll talk about it when I actually get into the sharpening process. But I've found myself lately skipping the 8000 and going right to the 15,000. I really do like this stone a lot, and I will run almost any knife that I have through it for a little bit just to fine out the honing and the polishing, and then maybe take it over to the stropping. It's kind of redundant, but I like the way the Bark River White Compound pulls out some of those finer hairlines that these stones don't necessarily do easily. So there are all the stones in my collection. You know, a lot of people ask me what stones are needed, recommended. You can jump around. I would say for most knife problems, even 3V, 400 is a great place unless you're really trying to get out micro bevels or you want to change the edge geometry. Then you might want something like a 120 or a 150, and Shapton and Nubatama make great options in there for sure. So maybe like a lower grit, like a, you know, like I said, somewhere between a 120 and a 220. Then a 400, maybe 1,000, and then a 5,000 if you even want to go that high is a good stretch. For kitchen knives, a lot of times they don't get brutalized. People recommend something like 800 and 1,000, and then jumping up as high as a 6,000. You kind of have to play with them to see what's going to work for you. But those are the ones in my collection, and I value all of them for various times for various steels. So we're going to go ahead and get going now on the sharpening and see what we can knock out of this Gerber Moment, again in that 5CR15 MOV. All right, guys, got the Nubatama 150 stone set up, and if you'll see, there's a lot of plate camera side, and that's because I've shifted this stone over to the right side almost completely flush, because I, through experience, have realized this stone is super absorbent. Let me just turn the water on for a second. Let me show you. Gone. No water on my finger at all. I'll show you again. It's very absorbent. See it? And it's gone. So this, until it's been kind of submerged for a long period of time, I don't know if you need to submerge it for long periods of time, but if you can keep a low current on it, nothing, you know, super major, let the water kind of get all over the stone, and keep it in a flow where the blade's going to constantly be grabbing some of the water, then you're pretty much good to go. So I've aligned it to this side. So again, this is my first time ever doing a hollow ground knife, so we'll see how it goes, hopefully well. But my goal, especially with something this thin, is to determine how high up the face of the knife I want to take the line. And typically it's about double, maybe triple the height of the original V-edge. So you can see this kind of shiny part right here. My goal is to kind of take it up here. And if you're fanatical about your bevel height, your secondary bevel or your cutting line, and you want to keep it as as smooth and beautiful as possible, then maybe take a pen or a Sharpie pen and mark along the blade line where you want the grinding to stop. Again, I kind of just eyeball it, but usually it's a double or triple the height of the original V-edge depending on the metal and the size of the knife. So all I'm going to do to start this off, it's not really an instructional video as much. I highly recommend you checking out Virtual Vice for that. But if I lay this completely flat and I want to angle it up just a little bit, because I'm trying to get, if this was the half of your knife, I'm trying to make an edge that's smooth like this, and right now I have this. So my goal is to grind that knuckle off, if you will, and blend this back. And again, that's going to be based a little bit on feel. So I'm just going to do, that's 3 quick, and I want to see if, even in that few strokes, if the 150 is pulling off too much metal. I'm going to turn my current down a little bit on my water. Okay, and I hope that you can see this right here. Let's see if it'll focus. But this part right here is already starting to pull that line up a little bit. So I'm going to stick with the 150 because it's not taking tons of effort, but it's not pulling metal too quickly. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so you can see at the back of the blade, this point's getting higher, not the water line, but the actual metal itself is being ground a little bit higher, and that's what I want. Once I determine the height that I'm going to go here, then I'm going to rotate the knife along the cutting line to get up to the belly and the tip. So that's pretty much it. And again, I don't know that it matters much, but I use a very, very lukewarm water to a cool water. I don't use anything really hot on these stones because I don't want them to crack. Because if they're stored in a cool place or something and there's extreme temperature difference, I don't want to worry about them cracking or chipping out or anything like that. And as with most people would recommend, I round out the edges of this stone with, you know, kind of a rounding motion like this with, again, a lower grit stone to make sure that there's nothing sharp. So if I lean, I'm not grinding into the metal itself. So. Again, all I'm doing is checking every once in a little bit to see if my grind line's where I want it to be. And I'm holding this at a very shallow angle, nothing too steep, because this is, again, hollow ground and the V-edge is very fine. So hopefully, I don't know how close this will focus in, but you can see relative difference between here and back here that I've improved the height, and I can already feel that the stiffness of that point is rounding out. So this is coming along nicely. And I'm using this, you'll see it, there's a gentle rocking motion, nothing too crazy because there's not a lot of steel here, but just this minor rocking motion so that it's curving out that point. And I'm trying to use as much of the top of the stone as possible from the back to the front, because if you just stay in this motion, that's going to add to the quick dishing of a stone. And what I mean by that is the stone being kind of concave, and you don't want to do that. You want to keep it as flat as possible. So I'm trying to be as conscious as I can most of the time of making sure I use as much of the top of the stone as possible. I do know dishing will happen, but I'm trying to slow that process down. This is about the height I'm going to want to get on this knife. I hope you can see that back there. It's not even quite double, but it's smoothing out nicely. So something like an Essie, in my experience, depending on how much steel there is behind that point, an SE5 would probably be a lot different. I'm more than likely going to have to make that a little bit higher, that line higher, to get that steeper V out. Again, it's all relative to the blade, the grind, your personal preference, that sort of thing. You can see I'm starting to rotate the knife forward now to get up the belly line. Now what I'm doing is I'm feeling that transition to see if it's what I want. And I'm putting a little bit of pressure on the blade, nothing crazy. But I do want to control and not just let it skip or slide around. I want to make sure that it's grinding relatively even all the way up. And as I get up to the tip, I'm changing the height to make sure that it follows the taper. So I'm going from here and kind of raising the back of the knife. Okay. And for the other side, sometimes I'll go this direction. It just kind of depends on the grip of the knife and what I'm feeling at the time. And then sometimes I'll actually pull it toward me. And again, this is a lot of muscle memory because I'm not using any type of bevel guide or anything like that. So I'm trying to just get the shallowness the same on both and the grind height the same. And that will kind of keep it from going too asymmetrical. Now, if you're wanting to do something asymmetrical, then of course you just change the angle that you're holding the knife at. All right, I'm gonna shut this off now. And this has been running nonstop on this now, so you could see a film of water staying relatively well on the top of that, but I let it run the entire time because it takes a while to get to that point. And if you start sliding your knife, you'll start seeing it absorb relatively quickly. But anyway, I didn't spend too much trying to make sure all the angles and stuff were, let's see if this will refocus, up the edge of the blade were completely symmetrical. Sometimes I'll try to do that. Again, this is like a $20 knife and I'm just kind of demonstrating with it. So I've ground out that hard corner. It's a lot smoother now. And all I'm going to do is work my way up the stones to kind of hone this out and polish it up. This is the Tojiro 400 now. And this is kind of hard to explain, the feeling. You know, people sometimes will say, well, you know, kind of how do you know? And it's hard to tell them. You say just by the feel that you get with the knife, the steel, and the stone. And basically with each grit you move up, at least it's been in my experience with most nice steels, you will feel a little bit of resistance, kind of like if you're sanding a piece of wood. You might feel a little bit of piece of resistance, and then you just kind of gradually keep, kind of sliding through that area. And when you feel harmony, I know that sounds cheesy, but when you feel a smoothness throughout the angle of the knife, from the back through the belly and all the way up through the tip, and you don't feel it like grabbing, you don't feel that it's rough, and you can look at your knife edge and see if there's any imperfections, and you move up to the next one. And a lot of times, for me anyway, when I feel that hesitation, it's as I'm coming up from the straightaway through the belly. So as you're making, these things are kind of pulled on a sanding belt. If you can picture this plane right here is a belt, a very fast moving sanding belt. What they can actually do is take this and then pull through this way to make that original line, and you don't have any moving parts here. Everything's being done by this motion, so you're having to try to push a knife through that turn and making it symmetrical, smooth as you pull. So it's almost like carving. You start flat and then pull up toward the tip, kind of thing. That's what I'm doing when I'm rounding through the belly line. And that's the part where I typically have the biggest hang-ups, and the part that took me the longest to kind of learn how to do or get through. And to each their own. A lot of people have different sharpening preferences and styles and theories. This is what works for me, and I'm trying to explain it to you. What you feel when you're kind of freehanding it, that's the closest I can get to doing it. And again, this steel is moving along really well, so I don't feel that I'm gonna have to spend a tremendous amount of time with each stone type. And as I go up at the grits, I typically spend less and less time until maybe the really high ones, like the 15,000 or something like that, where I may want to work on some extra polishing or something like that. So the tip on this back side is not evened out quite as much as I want. So. You can feel it starting to sharpen out now. It was really kind of rough after that 150, but this 400 is really starting to really move it to an edge. This is definitely sharp enough to cause damage in cutting right now. So now that I feel like I'm pretty much done with this stone, I'm going to kind of do 2 extra passes kind of each way, just to kind of get rid of any hairs or anything on the edge. I do have a deburring felt block, which on the lower grit stones sometimes I'll run it through just to make sure. You don't need one of these for sure. You can just do some diagonals on the next stone up, but it's a handy little thing. And what I'll often do is these little Nagara stones that the Chaucer come with, if there's any residual metal lines left, I'll just kind of hit the top of it real quick to kind of remove any metal that may be deposited in the top of the stone. And again, each time before I begin, or every other time at least, depending on how much stone sharpening I've been doing, I will make sure that the top of each of these is flat. Next consecutive stone is the 800. And I am going to go ahead and do the 800. I feel it's a good grit transition. But I will probably skip the 1000. I don't know that it'll be needed, so I'll let this run just for a second on this Chaucer here. This has got a very, very smooth feel, and if it feels really good going from grit to grit, that's usually telling me that the sharpening process is going well. I haven't missed anything along the way. I don't have any unusually steep areas, because that's what I'm going to feel when I'm coming down and moving this angle. I'm going to feel if something is out of sorts, if you will. This is my first time, as I've probably mentioned, working with a 5CR15 MOV Chinese stainless steel. And I would have to say that based on this experience, how quickly it kind of takes an edge, how there wasn't a lot of difficulty setting the original, well, the new geometry to brand new steel. It's somewhat, in my opinion, reminiscent of sharpening like a maybe a VG10. Maybe not a lot like maybe like the Fault Newmans, I don't know. They just have such thicker bevels, save the F1, that it's not quite the same. The F1 may be a little bit closer, but let me grab my Endura. This is my Spyderco Endura, and you can see, if it'll focus here, that I've added a convex in place of the V-edge that came on this one. Extremely sharp knife, but putting the edge on this is fairly similar to putting the edge on this Gerber Moment. Reminds me kind of that experience. It responds somewhat like that. I did get one of these natural Nagara stones per the recommendation of Virtue of Ice, who I think has got an outstanding sharpening technique, as evidenced by his blades. And I'm going to use this just to kind of get a slurry going on the top of this Chaucer 5000. Another good test, whoa, in my opinion, is if you know that you have a Nagara stone that's flat, really flat, not one of these faux ones that'll stick, but one of these natural stones. If you're rubbing the top and you're not feeling it stick a lot in a lot of places, then that should tell your stone's relatively flat. I know that if they start to dish a little bit, this will kind of skip and kind of grab in places. And so right now, you know, there's a little bit less, a little bit more surface tension because of the water, but right now I can throw that right across the top. So this stone's really flat, you know, fairly good way to tell. But anyway, you don't have to have these. I started using them, and now on my 1,000 plus stones, I just kind of grab for it. It's what I've been used to. So 5,000 at this point. This is already relatively sharp. I can feel it. It's actually very sharp. This is going to be kind of working out some of the buff lines, or some of the grind lines, and starting to polish this and really bringing that edge to a crisp point. It slides very smooth. The Chaucer 5000 is maybe overall my favorite stone. I like the way that the steel glides on it. It's quiet. It's just almost like ice skating, kind of. You watch the steel going over the stone. To me, it's relaxing. It drives my wife nuts, but to each their own. She also doesn't like running water, go figure. So very, very smooth, and it's quiet, it's delicate, it's peaceful, but you can see right here that it is pulling metal. So it's doing its job, and it's just subtly bringing that edge to a really, really fine and theoretically really hard point. Depends on how thin you make it, but I've always liked the way these stones have performed over a secondary micro bevel, especially in 3G. Sorry, not 3G, 3V. The 5,000 is where I usually have to tell myself, okay, it's time to stop, because it's so smooth. It's a delight to use. Not a cheap stone, but I've been sharpening on this one for quite a long time, and you just spend so little time on the stone, really. You know, maybe a couple minutes a knife, that it doesn't really have time to dish out. It's very, very well made. And honestly, barring me dropping it or it freezing in the winter and me putting it under water that's not the correct temperature or anything like that, this should last a lifetime. Okay, rinse this off real quick and show you here. Let's see if it'll focus. All right, well, hopefully it's, there you go. You can see it's polishing up. And one thing that you've got to be willing to do in this scenario, and I had to teach myself this, is not get caught up in, if it's got any type of knife when you buy it, even if it's just got a satin brush finish, you're going to see a transition in quality from the actual cutting edge up the face of the knife. This one happens to have a very light pearlescent kind of coating on it. And so right here, you'll see this kind of, it gets a straightaway. The coloring up here, you'll see the, right here, it kind of straightens out. And that is not always indicative of what your angle's doing. And when in doubt, hold it up to the light, you know, put the light directly behind the knife and study the curve. Because this may look like the belly has straightened out right there, but the curve is actually pretty uniform. Same on this side. This side's got more of the stain or the finish removed toward the tip than this side does. So you might think, oh, no, I've done something. Just check your curve and make sure that it's not overly ground flat or whatever. But in my experience anyway, what the surface looks like after some grinding isn't indicative of the actual curve of the blade. And what you don't want to do is, for example, spend too much time grinding the belly, because that'll flatten it out. But again, I always look at the blade edge. If I can't tell, hold it up to a light, creating a silhouette, and see if the shape of the blade is still intact. All right, guys, here's the Shapton 15,000. And my experience has been a great stone, but it performs a little bit better if I, this is a Norton Flattening Stone. If I give it a little bit of a running over first, just to kind of, I don't know, I've just always figured that after hitting it, I don't want a diamond stone, but hitting it with this first, I don't know if it aerates the surface, it kind of loosens up, because this is a very hard stone, but it seems to prep the surface really well. Again, to each their own. If it's performing the way you want it to, then you don't really need to worry about much else. Again, it's that Nagara stone. And I will say this about the Shaptons. They are almost flush with the height of the locking plates on this stabilizer here, this platform. So if you want, I've done this before too, if I think, especially if it's a longer blade, moving the stone over to the edge of the platform will keep your knuckles and stuff from getting too close to this. So if your blade's just going, you have free space and your blade's going this way and then even sliding it that way to go the other side, you can work with this because it is flush, whereas the other stone's set up high enough, you have hand room. So, and this one, in my opinion, and again, part of the reason I hit it with that flattening stone first is it feels a little pebbly. I mean, it's very, very small, but it actually has a micro texture to it. And what I'm looking for, or, you know, again, this has been my experience, when does it perform best, when are my results been the best, is when there's almost a suction between the knife and the stone. When it feels like they're actually bonded, there's like a suction, and the grinding becomes smooth. It doesn't do it quite as much up near the tip, but this is one of those stones that I feel that it'll let you know relatively quickly if you're too steep or too shallow. You'll feel it start to like really scrape into it. And so when I feel that there's a suction, there's a difference in how loud it is. And it'll do it more in that transition because you're changing the height of that line. But when it's got a suction feeling, works exceptionally well with Scandi edge knives. Probably your like the sashimi knives or your kitchen knives where you have a very shallow, basically flat angle all the way through. But like a Mora or Enzo Camper loves these Tojiro Pro high grit stones. You can see it's pulling metal for a 15,000, but it is more fine tuning. So it's pulling it, but it's actually making the edge more of a mirror. I will give it a little bit pressure here and there if need be, just a little bit to round that line out to make sure it's even. Again, that's just how I do it. Oop. Now that was pulling up near the choil too much. I got it too close to the edge. Shouldn't make that sound, but now some people will say, you know, the metal residue on the stone is what's doing the sharpening or the cutting. I don't know if that's true or not, but obviously the stone with nothing on the surface does start pulling metal. So that seems off, but you know, what do I know? But I will tell you this, once this metal begins to, I mean, it's staying on that stone. Once it starts to get embedded, I don't feel that the knife flows as smoothly. So what I will do is if I still am doing some honing, like I am now, and it's not feeling as smooth or responsive as it did before, I'll grab one of the Chaucer Nagra stones and we'll use it as like an eraser. And what it does is it pulls all that metal. It kind of grabs it and basically resurfaces it. If we're sticking with the ice skating metaphor, I'm Zamboniing. I don't even know if that's a verb, but I'm taking the Zamboni to the surface right now. And this little bit of this Nagra, you see this redness? That's from this ceramic Nagra stone. Leave it on there. No big deal. And I'll go back to it. All right, so let's see if this will focus here. Sorry about this. It's a little bit lower light kitchen than I'm used to. There we go. You can see the new kind of mirror finish on that edge there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry this knife off, clean this stone off again with that Nagra stone, rinse off my sink plate, and then I will follow up you with the Bark River White compound. Here is that bevel line. You can see the mirror to it going up there to the tip. This side I look a little bit more of the stain ground off at the tip, but you can kind of see how it came out. Relatively knife, really sharp. I mean, relatively nice, really sharp. Feels awesome right now. And all I'm going to do just to finish it up, it's something else I like to do, even though it might be redundant. This is Bark River White compound. You know, it may not look like it, but metal residue and stuff. I'm just going to kind of hit this and put it right here in the frame on the new line area. And this actually is more just to buff out a little bit more of the lines that may be left in the edge, and kind of give me one last chance to maybe add a little bit of convex to that edge. And I don't spend a long time doing it, maybe just a minute or so. Oop. The tip got a little steep on me there. If you've never done this before, it's also very relaxing. This is a two-sided DLT leather strop. I've also got some strops from Strapman. They're a little bit less hairy. They're a little bit smoother. And they're nice as well. I just keep coming back to the DLT. I just like the way it handles my edge. All right, so let's see if there's any sharpness to this at all. I'm not testing it on the napkin, just removing the residue. All right, and then let's see how it cuts. I didn't do a paper cut test before, sorry, but it is relatively sharp out of the package. And it still is. So all the way through the tip there. I kind of turned it too steeply, but this hollow ground geometry with that razor sharp convex is good pairing. So really crazy sharp. Actually, if you're looking for a really cheap knife, maybe a beater, this has got more weight to it than I expected. It is full tang. The rubber grip does feel really good, especially when wet, which I just sharpened it for quite a while, and it was never slippery. Decent jimping. The coating doesn't throw sparks very well. You need to use the jimping itself. I did play around with a little bit in the backyard and stuff. Not an outstanding knife, but for 20 bucks, hey, what are you going to complain about, right? Cool little blade. Again, this is the Gerber Moment. The steel on this one was a hollow ground 5 CR15 MOV. Reportedly a decent stainless steel. I think it's out of China. And sharpens kind of like a VG10, sort of. So anyway, there you go. I'm not going to field review this knife. I've just got too many other things that I want to get done. But there's a look at how I might take a factory V edge off and add my own convex to the end. Sorry, to the edge. This knife is not wanting to focus in low light, sorry. There we go. And fun little project. I do recommend that if you're getting into freehand sharpening for the first time, maybe pick up something like a cheap buck knife or a Gerber or a Schrade or something like that that doesn't have really terrible steel, and try it out. I mean, the worst case scenario, you're going to mess up a $20 knife and not something that's like $200. But there you go, guys. I hope you found that useful. Again, check out Virtual Vice's channel. The dude knows his way around sharpening stones, and he's put more edges on more knives than I probably ever will. But that's a look at how I would go about doing it. Again, first time on a hollow ground, but it's a similar process throughout. Look, feel, and be smooth. All right, till next time, guys. Have fun out there. I hope you're enjoying all your knives and sharpening supplies. Until then, be safe and God bless.